make the data nerds happy, we felt inclined to record another episode about gender data today, specifically on the ethics around data collection. Often this information is collected simply because it's kind of always been collected, rather than having a specific plan in place as to what is going to be done with that data. So I'm super happy to be joined by the biggest data nerd of them all, Kai Scott. Hello, how are you doing?
Hey. Woo, woo, woo. Oh yeah, data. That's my favorite. I mean,
Such a
I
nerd.
can't. It's so true. I am a self-identified nerd, proudly a nerd, and yeah. The only thing is, I got to be careful because washrooms could be listening and be very
Oh
upset
yeah,
that I'm
washroom
like,
king. Well,
"Mm,
you can be speaking from somebody who lives in a kingdom or used to live in a kingdom, and
right,
that you can be the king of multiple different places.
right."
Unfortunately, we know.
Yes. I'll toggle between all of this, but definitely data number one for me. Yeah.
hmm hmm Well, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, really lovely day, and I'm always excited to talk about data. Nerd alert.
Good. I'm really glad. I'm really glad for you. This is the topic, as you know, that I'm always like, oh God, I don't really know anything about this. But hopefully there'll be other people who are in a similar position to me. So I
Mm,
won't be asking too many stupid questions. Hopefully. Hopefully
mm,
they'll be
mm,
useful. And one of the ones that I wanted to start with then is about the fact that gender data is sort of one of those pieces of information that is just always collected. It's almost automatic that
mm.
we just kind of don't even think about it. It's like we'll just ask for gender. And so I kind of wanted to ask, like, that's a bit of a problem in itself, no?
Yes, the unquestioning collection of gender data. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's so ingrained in our society as kind of part of just the thing that you collect to understand personal information about somebody. It's kind of similar
Mm-hmm.
to address, first name, phone number,
Right.
whether you're married, and then gender.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like
Mm-hmm.
the constellation of things that we think we need to know in order to either serve somebody if they're a client or a customer, or to support employees as part of an organization. And so it's just like automatic, unquestioned, and oftentimes doesn't have like an intended purpose beyond just having collected it. It's like we're done,
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
it. End station. And so it's kind of really interesting to go into organizations and just understand more about this gender data collection that they're usually already underway. But usually, when I ask them, why do you collect it? They usually say, well, it's just the way we've always done it, you know? Um,
Right.
yeah. And so that's where the conversation begins and then unfolds from there. So it's a very, yeah, rich and interesting journey that we usually go on with clients.
Mm-hmm. I kind of wanted to ask that again. I know you sort of gave an answer, but I
Mhm.
wanted to ask what clients say when you ask why, that they are like, what, obviously, because we always have is one answer,
Mm,
but what other kinds of answers do you usually get in relation to that?
mm. Well, the first reaction is actually a stunned silence. They're like, "What? What do you mean? Why?" And I think that reveals just how ingrained it is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
People don't even think to pause and say, "Okay, yeah, why are we collecting and what are we going to use it for and where's it
Mm-hmm.
going and who's going to have access to it?" And whole number of long questions. But yeah, the common thing is just like, yeah, it's always the way we've always done it, but shouldn't we collect it? Like they're a bit puzzled and uncertain sometimes, or they
Mm-hmm.
might actually have an intended purpose sometimes. Like it's not always a stunned silence. It
Right.
can be, but sometimes it's also a bit of an odd response. Like it's not
Mm.
maybe a direct map to gender for everybody,
Mm.
and that's where it gets complicated too. So yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, the way we've always done it. And I would say in our experience, most organizations don't have an answer to that question.
Mm.
Once we get over the stunned silence and people say, well, it's the way we've always done it, they don't actually have an answer. They
Mm,
collect it, and then it sits on a shelf, like the figurative
right.
shelf or the digital shelf. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I sort of wanted to ask because one of the things that I notice when I'm filling in a form or something and they're
Mm,
collecting gender data is that they don't tend to actually have an explanation of how it will be
mhm.
used, presumably because there isn't a reason for it to be
Right.
used. But I kind of wanted to ask about um, why that kind of clarity is
Mm,
that why it matters so much. Like you do need a purpose and you need to kind of
mm.
explain that.
Totally. And I can understand it from like somebody like yourself and myself and others who are filling out forms. They're like, why am I being asked this? Like,
Hmm.
and maybe not always related to gender. It could be like, why are you wanting to know about my income level? Like,
Hmm. Or
and
marital
I'm at the,
status. That
yeah,
one
that's a big
throws
one,
me. Why do you
right?
need to know that? I don't even want
It's
to know
like,
that.
right? So it's just like, and you're at the petting zoo. You're like, how does this relate?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's yeah. So the explaining is super important. I would say particularly for trans and non-binary folks, because oftentimes gender is collected in so many different ways and can mean so many different things to organizations or depending on the context. If you're in healthcare versus, signing up at your gym, there's like different utilizations or in so many cases not using it, but
Hmm.
collecting it that cause a lot of concern. It's just like there's a bit of skittishness that trans and non-binary folks feel because they're reading this form, and I'll just give myself as an example. I'll be like, okay, what is your gender? Okay, cool. And then there'll be sex based responses. And then I'm like, ooh, I don't know if you're if the organization fully understands what this data means to me and then
Mm.
how it'll be applied within their organizational context. And it just causes concern, especially if it's not explained. I will actually tend to not respond to it if that is an option. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you're
Mm.
forced to respond. But if no explanation is given, I don't feel confident enough to give that information because I don't know how it'll be used, and I can't even correct how it might be used based on
Hmm.
misunderstanding about what I'm providing. So yeah, it's complicated,
For
and
sure.
especially if it's not explained. Yeah.
Could you give like a bit of an explanation of what, when you say that you might select your gender and then you'll be given sex-based questions,
Mm,
could you give an
right.
example of what those questions might look like?
Right. So, yeah, what is your gender is the question. And then the sex based responses are usually female and male. And those are sex related versus
Mm.
man or woman. Hopefully, it's an expanded list, not always. And sometimes that's where they end, is just two, when there's actually a spectrum of gender identities. But even if it's expanded, people then include non-binary people on that list as well. It could be longer than that, depending on the situation. But if an organization is asking for what is your gender identity, and then I only see female and male, I that's enough for me to hesitate. And particularly for a non-binary respondent, there's not a place, not a thing to select too, right?
Hmm.
So that makes it complicated, in which case, especially if there's no explanation for how the information is going to be used, there's next to no confidence that they'll understand. Because what happens is they'll, based on the sex-based responses, some organizations map that onto what anatomy somebody has rather
Mm.
than what their internal felt sense of their gender is, which is what they're asking for when they're asking for gender. Or they'll assume what kind of pronouns somebody uses. Like they're just taking gender and then you kind of doing all kinds of things with it,
Hmm.
behind a door that nobody has insight into. And that can be disconcerting, not just to trans and non binary folks, but also cisgender folks or those who are
Hmm.
not trans. And so that's, yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Hmm. In what cases is it sort of relevant or where it makes sense to collect gender data? Like there are some examples where it can genuinely be useful or serve sort of
Mhm.
important purposes.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's really important to emphasize. Is we're not saying don't collect gender ever, right?
Mhm.
We want to be thoughtful about it, but there are really good reasons to collect gender data. I'm thinking in particular within the workplace, collecting representative data to understand who is represented in one's organization. Not just gender, it could be race and ethnicity, it could be, ability, immigration status, to the degree that people are comfortable sharing that
Mhm.
information, should always be voluntary. But that's where it's helpful to know, okay, we don't have that many of this gender in leadership. Like, what are we going to do about that in ways that don't reflect our society? So we're out of step with the general population. And there are things that we can do to better support folks or recruit more folks, whatever the case may be, if we have that data at the ready. So
Mhm.
there's representation. There's pay equity. That's in some provinces in Canada a requirement. So it's not
Mhm.
like optional, it's legally required. And thankfully, at least in British Columbia, the list is in an expanded form. So it includes men, women, and non binary folks, which is great. I would love to go a little step further and have trans men and women, but that's just me. And a little side note for
Yeah.
another day. But those are some really good, compelling cases, or even to know if there are specific supports that particular groups need, of which especially trans and non-binary folks can have unique needs that if you
Mhm.
collect those representation data, or if you have gender data, you can then see that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. On the flip side, then, of that, what would you say are some situations where collecting gender data is unnecessary? Or you talked about as well, like gender data sort of being repurposed. And so I
Mhm.
kind of wanted to talk about where organizations are trying to use it for something that it really shouldn't be used for.
Yeah. Well, the first reason I would say for not to collect it is if you're not going to use it. It's as
Right.
simple as that. Like,
For sure.
so if the first question I ask is why do you use it, and you're like we have no reason to use it, then that's the end of the story.
Right.
The recommendation is don't collect it. It's
Hmm.
simple and easy for the organization to implement because you just don't put it on the survey, the form, or whatnot.
Hmm.
So that would be kind of the first order. But if people have kind of listed out a few things or one or more things that they're going to use gender data for, we can go through them. And we do this in strategy sessions. We go through their list of either existing or what they would like to use it in the future. And one by one, we often see how organizations think that they can get much more out of gender data than really they can without
Right.
making assumptions. Yeah.
Hmm.
So this is where it gets complicated. A few
Hmm.
examples we've seen over the years. They collect gender and then they think they can know people's pronouns. So they want to do it says this person says she's a woman. Well, there I already did it. Therefore, this person uses she her pronouns, right? So
Hmm.
it's such an automatic thing that we do in our society, and you know, I think many times that mapping is correct for that person. It's not like it's never right,
Hmm.
but for those who it is incorrect, that puts them in a very difficult position of having
Hmm.
to come forward, out themselves, correct it, whatever, or not address it and be misgendered, right? So this is not a good mapping. Um, Other times, people collect gender to then map on to uh, assumed bodies, what people's sex characteristics are within a
Hmm.
healthcare context, and that doesn't always map, especially for trans and non-binary folks. Some people have had surgeries, others have not,
Hmm.
and so we can't use gender to know much about what somebody's hormones are, what their primary or secondary sex characteristics are. um,
Hmm.
And that often comes to play when an organization asks for gender and then provides that information to the healthcare benefits who are actually interested in sex.
Right.
So, yeah, so it gets all messy
Yikes.
because of that. So, those are
For
just
sure.
a few examples of what we're. Oh, one other example is this comes up in organizations that are having to verify identities. They'll often use first name, date of birth, and gender to verify because they feel like those are quote unquote stable, right?
Right.
So you can see how that's not the case for trans and non-binary folks, and so using gender as part of verification is like deeply troubling, and people can have their will have be required to say the gender they were assumed at birth rather than their correct gender, depending on what's on their government issued ID and yada yada yada. So it's just like there's other ways to verify without using gender.
As somebody who is whose gender changes on a regular basis, the
Yeah,
idea of gender being stable is such a funny concept. So uh, I get that.
yeah, exactly. It's like people, just based on how society has talked about gender, and it's just this considered this immutable fact that always stays the same, and it's not
Right.
the case always.
No. Um, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how those questions, when it comes to collecting data for someone's gender, should be compulsory, and so I kind of wanted to ask you about the importance of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So depending on the situation, um, there can be a requirement to provide gender data.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes organizations haven't thought it through. They just forgot to uncheck the required box, so it's not always that there's like this like heavy-handed approach being like intended, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is. Sometimes it's because of a legal requirement. They like want to, really emphasize that. Other time, like for example, universities, they do collect gender data of students to understand representation and who's graduating and who's not graduating and what degrees and on and on and on, which is really important data. And that requirement makes that possible. And it is then like forcing people into a situation where government has their data. And in a progressive province like BC, maybe it's fine, but now we're in a situation in the United States where, not so progressive or hostile states are using those data against trans and non binary folks. They have
Mm-hmm.
records of people who are trans, and that is deeply problematic because
Mm-hmm.
then they can, bring the force of law and make their lives miserable and difficult. So it's not, we have to think about kind of downstream consequences of these types of data collection efforts, especially government. So, yeah. Now I lost your question, your original question. Oh, it should be voluntary, is the main takeaway there. Because I appreciate that required gives people the data. And as a data nerd and, social scientist, I love data. But people ought to be able to make decisions for themselves. And if there's not enough trust, that is really important insight into needing to work harder to explain things or bring people
Mm-hmm.
along or whatnot. Like the scaffolding is not there. So I don't think people should be, or organizations shouldn't be afraid of low response rates because then that means there's more to do.
Mm-hmm. Fair. To end then
Hmm.
here, for organizations listening and or people of organizations listening and thinking, oh God, we do that. What's one question they should be asking themselves before collecting any gender related information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always encourage organizations as a starting point to, map where they collect gender. If there's just one or two, it's fine. It's not pretty manageable. But sometimes you collect it in, 10 different areas in 10 different ways, so it's a little bit of an inventory process to be like, whoa, okay, we have a lot of different ways going on here, and to standardize it a bit more. But then to map where it goes from there, downstream, it goes to this app, and then they use it in this way, or it goes to this department and they use it in this way, just map out the uses to know, okay, how's it being used? Okay, interesting. They're taking the gender data and now attributing titles, Mr., Ms., Mrs. Should we be doing that? So it gives you an opportunity to take stock of where things are at and how things are being utilized, and then to fact check or verify that that's a proper use of that without kind of losing anybody that may not have chosen those titles, those pronouns, they don't have that body, so the inventory is a really important starting point.
You have a resource that you wanted to share, and I was wondering if you could talk about that too.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about this. Gender, it's the gender data uses. It's very.
Such a nerd.
I know, it's so bad. It's so bad that I was excited to make this, and and I was like, oh, this is gonna be so good. But yeah, this is a template that we're going to provide, for free, based on, and this is something you can kind of download and then fill out as an organization to be like, this is how we're collecting gender. This is where, we're collecting gender. This is how we're going to use it. Here's who's responsible for the gender data. Who's here can access. We haven't even talked about access like that. That's really important, that depending on, if it's an employee or a client, who has access to that should be actually pretty limited, especially to people who know how to properly utilize those data without overextending or misappropriating those data too, right? So this just goes kind of bit by bit through that, and will allow organizations to properly set that up, and actually inspires conversations that really deepen the understanding and activates the data in ways that are powerful and beneficial, that people can see in action and then feel more inspired to provide more data because they know it actually translates into something. So all that to say, we have a template. Obviously, if you get stuck anywhere, we're happy to help at Transfocus, or just me, but to
I will
further
chipping in on that.
I mean, hey, you never know. We've got Nico deeply excited about data, so I feel like our project manager used to be a bit maybe quantitative suspicious, and now
okay, I can relate to that. Yeah.
Now likes the stats.
So I'm starting to understand that there is a level of indoctrination going on in Transfocus. Totally. This is the real transgender, is getting people into data.
Yeah, exactly. It's so subtle, nobody knows until it happens. They're like, wait a second, how did it happen?
Right. Well, look
so
out,
come
everyone.
Join us.
If next year I start saying about how much I love data, you'll know that it's happened to me too, and you're next.
Yeah. And you're like, blink twice if you need help.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kai.
Thank you.
And see you next week.